What if I told you that it's incredibly easy to throw harder than 99% of pitches and it requires just one simple change? Stick to the end of this video and I'll give you a step-by-step plan on exactly how to implement this one change. And I know this works because this is the exact thing I followed to throw 98 miles an hour in my professional baseball career, and it's helping our guys in the pitcher lab as well. Like this guy who gained 3 miles an hour in 1 month and is now throwing 95, or this guy who went from the low 80s to the low 90s, or even this guy who's up to 96 and beyond. So I'm not gonna waste your time, let's dive right in. Okay, so what the 99% don't train is rate of force development. And basically what this is how fast you're able to produce force. And so why this becomes important is because, you know, when we're young, we're doing strength training, we don't really think about baseball specific training, and we're just building strength, right? And so I like to visualize it like this. This is like your available force production. It's just like how strong you are, okay? And if you have a really good strength base, it might be, oh, you can squat, 2 times your body weight, okay? So you can squat like 400 pounds. You can deadlift, over 400 pounds and bench over 200, something like that. And so this is your available force production, your max force production your body can produce, okay? But the thing is, in the pitching delivery, it happens in milliseconds, right? And even any other sport, like elite sprinters. And so what happens is we can't actually tap into all of our force production potential. Because if you think about this, right? If you're doing a max squat, right? It's not like a explosive movement. It's like a grind, right? If it's true 1 rep maxes, and you're really taking a lot of time to produce that force, okay? But in the pitching delivery, it's gonna happen in milliseconds. And so you just won't be able to tap into the same amount of force that you would when you're spending, 4 to 5 seconds to actually produce that force, okay? And so even the most elite athletes only tap into like 80% of their force potential. It's pretty much like this, and this is like the elite of the elite, like sprinters and stuff like that are able to tap into 80%. And so for us, we're probably closer to 50 to 60%, okay? And so we're probably like only here in the pitching delivery, how much we can actually tap into, okay? And so the question becomes, how do we train to get more like this, right? To tap into more of our force production potential. And that is where rate of force development comes in, okay? And so, the first step with building the frame to throw harder is obviously just to build strength, because you need to be strong, okay? You need to have a strong, durable body to be able to produce enough force to throw hard, okay? But once you've hit a strength base, and I created a whole video on what a strength base is and what you should be kind of looking for. But once you've hit that strength base where you no longer have to get stronger to actually go out and throw harder, well, that's when you want to work on actually tapping into as much of this strength as possible, okay? And so if you're here right now, if you can only tap into like 50% of your strength potential, then you want to try to raise it. And the way you raise it, right, the way you go from here to here is training rate of force development. And obviously this isn't the only thing, but this plays a major role, rate of force development, okay? And so this is why you get guys who are really strong, right? They are increasing all of their lifts, but they're not throwing any harder. I talk to so many kids who are in college to where, freshman year I was up to 90, and now I'm a junior, I've become bigger, stronger, but I'm not throwing any harder. And so a lot of it is going to come down to this, when you're a freshman, you might have been here, right, with your strength potential, and you're still tapping into this much. But then, over the 3 years, you gain all that strength to get up here, but you're still only able to tap into this much. And again, there's multiple factors. It's not only rate of force development, it could be like a sequencing thing with your mechanics. But for this video purpose, we're just going to assume that, the mechanics stayed the same, everything stayed the same. It was just the strength went up, but he wasn't able to tap into it. So now that you have a simple idea of why rate of force development is pretty important for pitchers, let's dive a little bit deeper and let's go into each piece of the puzzle, okay? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the lower body because this is where I see a lot of rate of force development and how quickly you can produce force become really, really important, okay? So I'm gonna start with the back leg. Okay, so for the back leg, right, you might be thinking, oh, I just need to produce as much force as I can so that, I can push off and then I'll throw harder. And that's kind of true to an extent, right? The more force you can put into the ground, technically the harder you throw. The force plate data shows this where the harder throwers are putting in more force down and also horizontally, okay? Vertically and horizontally, which means they're pushing down really hard, but they're also pushing this way really hard, right? To gain some momentum. But the interesting thing about the back leg, right? The number one metric that correlates with pitching velocity with the back leg is impulse. For multiple studies that show that a higher impulse in the back leg leads to an increase in pitching velocity. Okay, and so what is impulse? Impulse is force multiplied by time. Okay, and so basically it's how much force you can put in the amount of time that you get. Okay, and so let's just visualize the back leg and its window to apply force, right? In the pitching delivery, you leg lift and then you're down and you have all of this time to produce force down and horizontally, right? And so you have this like couple milliseconds right here before you rotate and it's all in the front leg, right? This is the window that I'm talking about, the small window that you're able to produce force into the back leg, okay? And so let's just visualize that as this is the window, right, that you can produce force in. This is when the leg lift happens, and this is when the back leg rotates and you're on your front leg, okay? And this is where the back leg load is, that position, that's the time, okay? And so a really, really good impulse looks something like this, okay? Vertically, it's how much force you're putting in. So, the higher it is, the more force you're putting in. And this is time, okay? And so in this window, right, you have these couple milliseconds. You want to have as much force production as possible in that window, okay? And so if you can look at this, it has a slow gradual build up and then it has a deceleration. And this is what a healthy impulse looks like. And I'm not going to get too deep into, why the shape is like this. But basically what we want to do, right, is maximize this. And how we maximize this is basically to increase the amount of force that, we can put in, okay? And so this all comes back to rate of force development. If we're able to produce more force in a shorter amount of time, in those milliseconds that are happening, then, if we're able to produce more force, then your impulse might look like that, right? And so it's going to be a greater impulse in the back leg than if you weren't able to do it, okay? And if you're really slow at rate of force development and your impulse even looks like this, let's just say you don't really have good rate of force development, right? And so it takes you a long time to actually get to this peak, and then it's more like that, all right? And you're probably thinking, well, you're able to produce enough force, right? The same amount of force than these two. But again, the back leg, its impulse was the direct correlation to pitching velocity. It wasn't peak force, okay? And so even if you're able to hit that peak, you're missing out on all of this force application that you could have done in all of this time, right? Impulse is the measure of force multiplied by time. And so you want to maximize as much force in as little period of time as possible, okay? And so this is something that, a lot of guys struggle with, is very slow rate of force development. And so, you get a crazy impulse like this. I'm obviously over exaggerating this, but that's kind of like the visualization, okay? And so for someone like this, if we really work on rate of force development, in theory, it should go more like that, right? And so now they have way more force production, and they have a better impulse over that short period of time. And that's kind of how I like to look at it is like, okay, with the back leg, you know, it's not like a jolt of energy going down. We don't want to just peak and then, you know, going down. It's more of like a slow buildup of energy, right? But you're still producing as much force as you can vertically and horizontally to maximize that impulse. So now let's talk about the lead leg, right? And the lead leg block. And this is way, way simpler. And basically what you want to look at for the lead leg is knee extension velocity, which is how quickly your knee locks out, right? That has a great correlator to pitching velocity. You know, it also does different things, like it pops open the hips, stuff like that. But for this context, and when we're talking about rate of force development, let's just talk about knee extension velocity, okay? And so basically it's how quickly can you straighten your leg or brace, right? How good can you brace your front leg, right, when you hit, okay? And so I really like to see like when you get like a nice straightening effect, right? And then you throw, but you know, some high velocity throwers are very bent, but they brace really well. Once they hit, they're not moving. It's just like, it's like a very good brace, okay? And so it can happen either way. But for this, right, the lead leg, you need to have really good rate of force development to actually hit and send force upwards, right? And so the lead leg is even like a shorter amount of time than the drive leg to be able to produce force because it's very reflexive, right? And so once you hit a reflexive moment, and it happens really, really quickly. And so again, with rate of force development, you want to be able to produce so much force in a tiny amount of time, right? To be able to really lock out that lead leg or brace and then send the energy upwards, okay? And so that's why the lead leg rate of force development is super, super important. So the last one I want to touch on is the upper body and rate of force development in the upper body, right? And so in my mind, this isn't as important as the lower body, but it's still very important because, you know, the lower body is a little bit of a slower movement, right? And so you can actually rely on the muscles to produce force, but the upper body is very elastic based, right? Like none of this stuff, like with layback into throwing, none of it's going to be like muscle driven. It's mainly tendon driven, right? And so with rate of force development in the upper body though, there are a couple things that I do think about, which is rotation, right? Rotation and some type of pressing and some type of rowing, okay? And so with the rotation, I mean, this is pretty self-explanatory, but the amount of force that you're able to produce when you're rotating, right, is going to really, really help you in your pitching delivery, right? As soon as you hit in the lead leg, the hips are going to pop open, and then from here, it's just pure rotation, where you want to produce as much force rotating, okay? And so that's one thing. The pecs, right? I really like to think about the pecs. And with the pecs, right, I'm not going to get into too much detail, but it has to be really strong in the eccentric and the isometric, right? It doesn't have to be as strong in the concentric, but it does have to be really good at turning on really quickly, right? Because this is just a really quick movement with the arm action. And so all of the accelerators like the pecs, the front of the shoulder and stuff like that, I really like to work on rate of force development and also the back of the upper body, right? Because we still need to decelerate. And so it still has to produce a lot of force really quickly to be able to decelerate and keep our arm safe. Okay, so the question becomes, you know, now you know that rate of force development is really important for the pitching delivery, but how do you actually train it? Well, there are 4 of my favorite ways to actually train rate of force development, okay? And so the first one, and the most common one that I see, is velocity-based training, okay? And so basically what this is instead of, you know, when you're building strength, you want to increase the amount of weight that you're actually putting on the bar, and your ability to adapt and push harder and push heavier weight. When you're doing velocity-based training, you're actually doing a lighter weight, like 50 to 60% of your 1 rep max, and you're doing it as quickly as possible, okay? And so the measure becomes how quickly can I move the bar instead of how much weight can I move on the bar? Okay, and so basically this trains everything, where it's like when you train rate of force development, it's very much neuromuscular based, right? And so your brain has to send signals to the muscles, and the signal comes back up to tell it, okay, let's fire it. And so we need to make those connections really, really smooth, right? And really, really quick. And so this is something that would really train that is, okay, let's work on, turning on our pecs as quickly as possible. So it might be a bench, and it's like, okay, bang, okay, and like you do that, and the measure is how quickly can I lift the weight instead of how much. And so this is something that I see in a lot of programs, but the big mistake that I see is that you're not going quick enough, right? You're doing like a velocity-based training program, but then you're still going slow. You're not going max effort. Like these have to happen at max effort, right? It's just like if you're doing a velo day, right? You need to be throwing at max effort or you're not getting the right stimulus. Okay, and so if you're doing this and you're half-assing it, then you're not getting anything out of it because you're not even progressing strength, you're not progressing rate of force development, you're just doing nothing, right? And so these have to be at like max effort, okay? And that is the biggest key for velocity-based training. But I know that it can be kind of difficult to really, know if you're going at 100% effort. You might feel like you're going at 100% effort, but sometimes you're moving way slower than your true max, right? You probably know when you go throw and you feel like you're throwing at max effort, but it's like 10 miles an hour slower than your true max effort, right? That's probably happened to you. And so this happens with VBT training as well. And if you don't have a machine that actually measures how quickly the bar is going, then there's one trick that I really like, which is ballistic movements and ballistic training, which is something that I really, really like. I incorporate into my own training right now. But basically, it's like jumping. Instead of doing like a trap bar VBT where you're trying to lift it as quickly as possible, and you don't really know how quick that bar speed was, well, now you're actually going to jump off the ground. Okay, and so what this does is basically, if you load the weight up, right, to the point where you're barely able to jump off the ground and you know that weight, well then next week you can just load it up the same way and then do the same thing, and you know that you have to produce enough force to be able to get your feet off the ground, right? And so the bar speed is probably going pretty similar, all right? And so this is something that I incorporated a lot during my time of a little bit when I was a little bit more advanced, when I was trying to go from low to mid 90s to more the upper 90s, and ballistic stuff is something that I did on a regular basis. Okay, one thing that I did do, which is something I do not recommend, right, is loading the bar up on my back and actually doing jump squats with like 300 plus pounds. And please don't do that. It led to back issues down the line. Now, what I would recommend is using a belt squat, right? Really loading it up on the belt so that there's no actual load going on, and you can just jump from there, and it's a safe thing. But basically, you're building crazy amounts of horsepower when you actually do this, because if you're loading it up, but you're still able to get your feet off the ground, I mean, you're producing a massive amount of force, right? And you're training rate of force development because you have to be able to produce enough force to actually jump and get off the ground, okay? And so those are two of my favorites to actually train rate of force development. Another one that's super effective is overcoming ISOs. And I made a whole video on overcoming ISOs, but this is something that I use more as a primer, right? But what this basically is you are pushing against something that won't move, okay, for like 3 to 7 seconds, as hard as you can. Okay, one of my favorites is like the split stance overcoming ISO, where you're in a split stance and you're pushing up as hard as you can. And it kind of mimics like the pitching delivery position where my front foot would hit. I'm in this position, and so I can be in a position like this and try to go max effort, right, and produce as much force as possible into an immovable object. And what this basically does is when you're pushing max effort against something that won't move, right? The brain is signaling to the muscles like, oh, this is a task that we're trying to accomplish to actually move this thing. Let's recruit more muscle fibers, right? To try to do that. And so as you're pushing, your body and your muscles and your brain start to recruit more muscle fibers, right? To try to move it. And so it kind of trains like your whole body to recruit more muscle fibers, right? There was a great study, a 4-week study where a group did overcoming isos for 4 weeks and they would test vertical jump, right? And what they found was they significantly increased vertical jump after 4 weeks of doing overcoming isos. But the catch was their muscles didn't grow, nothing really physically changed. It was more just neuromuscular, where the brain got better at sending signals and recruiting more muscle fibers. And so this is something that helps in that aspect of, it's going to help rate of force development because it's just going to train your body to recruit more muscles and to fire it really, really quick. Okay. And so my last one, and this is something that I see a lot of guys do, which is plyometrics, right? Plyos. Any type of medicine ball stuff, jumps, and you can even do like banded jumps, stuff like that. For example, with my lower body routine that I used to do, I would do like an overcoming iso, and this would be like a split squat overcoming iso, right? And then I would go into a plyometric of, it might be a assisted split stance jump into a resisted band jump. Okay, and so I'm just working all different types of the spectrum, right? To really, really hammer rate of force development, how quickly my muscles can produce force, how elastic I can be. And then I might go into something like a VBT or ballistic thing where I go on a belt squat, really load it up to as heavy as I can and still jump. And I'll do that for the main movement of the day. Okay, and so that's kind of how I would structure it. And these are kind of like the 4 ways that I really like to increase rate of force development, right? And again, 99% of players don't do these things. They might incorporate it here and there, but there's no intention behind it, right? Like I said, when they're doing VBT stuff, they're not going max effort, and so they're not getting much out of it. Even with plyometrics, they're not going max effort. They're just doing it just to do it. And so they're not actually training what it's trying to train, which is maximal force production in the shortest amount of time. Now, if you actually start to think about that, it's like, okay, now with all of this stuff that I'm doing, I'm trying to train how quickly I can produce force. It would make sense to really make your training like max effort, right? Like if you're doing, let's say for ballistic, it should be like as quickly as you can, right? As hard as you can, instead of, just doing it just to do it. And so that is one thing that's overlooked, is intention, and knowing what you're working on. That can really, really increase the intensity of your training and the results that you're going to get, right? And again, 99% of players don't know this stuff, but you do. Okay, and so just by watching this video, it puts you in the top 1% to be able to go out and work on this stuff, right? And really get some good results out of it. Now, again, if you want help with any of this stuff, velocity development, pitching development, program building, The Pitcher Lab is a company that I co-founded to help pitchers increase pitching velocity and pitching development, right? And so if this is something that would interest you, if you need help with actually getting to the next level, right? Top link in the description. We book about 5 to 10 calls a day. And so if you can get a spot, then do that right now. Again, we're only looking for serious athletes looking to get to the D1, minor league, or even the MLB level. And so if you're that person, well, you can book a call with us and I'll see you there.